Excellent. Well, thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and hopefully everyone is seeing my slides here already. So I'll go ahead and jump right in.
Hey, one other thing I do want to point out, please use the Q&A, not the chat, to ask questions, give us feedback. One of the reasons we do that is sometimes people were a little concerned about the chat and getting contacted by other people they may not know on the webinar. So that's why we're limiting it right now to the Q&A. So if you have comments, we'll get to them as best we can. We love the interaction. If we don't have a chance to get to it, then we'll absolutely follow up with you in the next 24 hours or by Monday. Okay, all yours, Brian.
Excellent, perfect. All right, so hopefully my slide transition just fine. I'm going to start with just a brief introduction this morning to let you know a little bit about who I am and where I work for SynerComm. And then we'll jump into talking about penetration testing in financial institutions. As I said, my name is Brian Judd. I've been with SynerComm now for over 18 years. Been in a security focus that entire time. I had a great opportunity early on to work more in the engineering and support and training around Juniper firewalls, Juniper networks, checkpoint firewalls. Many good years of experience there, but also working in IP telephony. And then real early on in my time at SynerComm, I got the opportunity to step in and do an independent IT and security audit for a financial institution in the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin. That was something fairly new to me at the time. We had some work papers and programs put together, but that was so early in, I guess, what I would call the independent IT audit days that there wasn't a lot to work from out there at that point. Even ISACA was, fairly young as far as a group and developing standards and stuff like that. So, really got the opportunity to learn audit from a very grassroots level, build work papers, base them on like the FFIEC's examination handbooks and stuff like that. And that really led to many of the services and things that we provide today. So we're not just doing those more traditional IT security audits and assessments, but today the bulk of our testing and validation is in the penetration testing realm. And really my role today is much more in management and leadership here at SynerComm, probably for the better part of the last 10 years. But I do still get opportunities to kind of get my hands wet, if you will, and perform some of these engagements, or at least help out with them from time to time. Quick agenda today for what I'm going to review. I want to talk first about penetration testing scope, because scope is really perhaps one of the most important things, or the most important part of a penetration test. If you're not testing the right things, or looking at the right systems, there's definitely opportunity to miss very important things. I'm going to spend a second on passwords too. I think that it's not something unique to financial institutions by any means, but passwords are a big problem in every industry, and they kind of top our list, and they've continued to. So I want to spend a minute on that. And then really the bulk of the discussion today is around pen test strategies then for different sized financial institutions. The one thing that we've really discovered over the years is that there are really big differences between small, mid, and large size financials. So we'll go through that. And then at the end, if we got some time, I can certainly try to answer any questions. Otherwise, we'll definitely follow up with the chats and emails and stuff like that as well. I'll always be available to offline after the presentation. All right, so why are we talking about penetration testing for financial institutions? One of the things that is most obvious is that unlike a lot of other industries, financial institutions are required to undergo penetration tests and other independent audits and assessments. Usually on an annual basis. A lot of times the terminology says on a regular basis, But I think for the most part, everybody agrees regular is at least annually, and maybe in larger institutions or higher risk institutions more often than that. These independent audits are often performed by accounting firms. But one thing that I always want to point out is that when it comes to penetration testing, this is really a highly skilled, highly specialized type of service, and it should not be performed by someone without at least a few years of actual penetration testing experience. And I know that's kind of the gotcha right there. How do these pen testers get experience to get those few years before they could or should be used in an engagement? And that's a challenge for firms like ours, but to say the least, you do not want just a vulnerability scan or somebody passing off some automated scans and tools as a penetration test. So always looking for a good qualified firm is extremely important. And I don't want to knock on like the accounting, the CPA firms, but typically that is not where you go to for your penetration test, although they may be just fine for other IT audits and assessments. So I mentioned earlier that the scope of the pen test is really critical. It's perhaps, again, the most important part of the process, because if we're not looking at the right systems and testing the right things, there's a very good chance that something will be missed. Likewise, we don't want to do the opposite. We don't want to test something that you don't have permission, that you don't own or can't allow us to test. So we definitely want to be careful in scope like that as well. At the most basic level, penetration testing should be external. It should be internal, meaning, inside the walls of your buildings, inside of your internal networks, inside that firewall. External always meaning, out on the internet, things that are publicly reachable or available from at least some places on the general internet. And I always want to make sure too that the social engineering aspect doesn't get ignored. For the most part, we are all pretty well aware that employees are often the biggest vulnerability or the biggest risk area for a lot of organizations. And we want to make sure that they are part of the penetration test evaluation as well. Not just your know before phishing services and stuff like that, but really targeting them to see, will they give up a multi-factor token, or maybe just click the accept button on their cell phone when a multi-factor prompt is coming through. So again, social engineering, testing the employees, just as important as testing your other IT systems and assets. Also, don't forget your cloud systems. It used to be that we see one or two systems starting to move to the cloud. Now we see entire organizations hosting all of their public assets in the cloud. Sometimes even their private networks are in the cloud as well. And almost all organizations today, anybody that's got Microsoft 365 and Azure Active Directory and still has an on-premise domain controller already has a hybrid cloud as well. So it's something to make sure that we're aware of and including in the scope of penetration testing. Some other things that should be considered or should be tested on some regularity: web applications, mobile applications, APIs, web services. All of these things should be scoped and tested with some regularity, as long as these are custom applications and things that are under your control. You probably don't need to go that far if you're only using commercial or what we like to call off-the-shelf applications. But a lot of organizations have wireless networks. In fact, I would say most financial institutions that we work with do have wireless networks. Those should be tested at least on an annual basis, or anytime some significant changes have been made. If you fall under PCI, you definitely need to do some quarterly wireless assessments and things as well, looking for rogue networks. Physical penetration testing is something to consider as well. Can people walk into your branches, into data centers, get to open network ports, or find information, papers, things left out on desks and stuff like that. Always consider your third-party managed and hosted applications as well. This could be a bit of a more of a gray area of whether or not they could be allowed in scope or allow testing. It really depends on who owns them and who manages them. But if they create risk to your organization, then they should be considered as well for penetration testing. And passwords. Passwords are probably the number one vulnerability that we keep seeing over and over and over. It hasn't changed, unfortunately, even when we notch it up, years ago from like 6 characters to 7 characters to 8 characters and 9 and 10. This is still a really, really big problem. So definitely consider having your passwords, or more correctly, your password hashes, analyzed and tested on a regular basis as well. So a quick aside on passwords. I did like to bring this slide in here from another presentation that I've done recently, because as I said, 20 years in the business now, bad passwords are still topping our list of the most critical vulnerabilities. We're seeing 8-character passwords now can crack in sometimes just minutes or hours. That's all based on like modern hardware and cracking systems that we're able to build and use these days. But a 9-character password, even on 2 to 3 year old hardware right now, a 9-character password cracks in less than a day. So, a lot of companies are trying to decide, is it worth it to go from 8 to 9? I think the short answer is no. Even 14-character passwords can be quite easy to guess. The example that I show here on the slide in red is an actual password that not surprisingly cracked on a recent penetration test. You can see there that it's meeting all of Microsoft's complexity requirements. It has uppercase and lowercase letters. It has numbers, and it has a special character. So it's got 4 out of 4 of those categories, and it's 14 characters long. So why does a password like that crack so quickly? Because we understand password generation techniques. We know how people like to make easy to remember passwords. So the month that they created that password, just a couple months ago, September, the year 2022, and because they need that special character, they always throw either a pound or an exclamation point on the end. Of all the special characters, those 2 are by far the most used, and the pound sign is the number one. Probably about 80% of the time that a special character needs to be used and a user creates that password on their own, they're picking that pound sign. So a big recommendation is that multi-factor is a must. Your users cannot be relied on to create good passwords. Even a 14-character requirement can result in some really bad passwords. So we always recommend using passphrases. Spell out a sentence, even use spaces and punctuation and stuff like that. It's really easy to get 20, 30-character passwords when you're using a phrase instead of just a password. And then my recommendation is always to remember 1 or 2 of these good long passphrases for your core system. So I need to log into my Windows workstation here to get to my password safe. So I need to remember a good long passphrase for my Windows workstation so that I can just open up a password safe in there. And maybe that safe has another good long passphrase on it. But beyond that, every other password I own should be created and generated by my safe and managed by my safe so that it's never reused anywhere else. I shouldn't ever need to know that password, and hopefully I'll never even have to type it. I can let my safe enter it in web forms and other applications and things like that. So one recommendation there is to always look at your passwords on a regular basis. A lot of companies like to change their passwords every 90 days. Quarterly password assessments are a very good recommendation. So how do we crack these things so fast? A little bonus slide here as well. Graphics processing units. If you haven't heard of these GPUs before, you're probably not a gamer or a password cracker. But if you are, you've definitely heard of these. Just a few weeks ago, NVIDIA released their RTX 4090, which is their latest generation in video graphics cards, again, for playing games. But they also are amazingly powerful for things like Bitcoin mining and, of course, hash cracking or password cracking. So the type of hashes that Windows uses are called NTLM. And those NTLM hashes, just a single 4090 graphics card can guess about 280 billion passwords per second. So you just think of that scale. How many zeros are in 280 billion? That's a lot of guesses in just a single second. So that's how we get through 8 and 9 character passwords in no time at all. Their key space is so small that, at 280 billion guesses a second, we're going through it in no time. So again, doing regular cracks and password assessments is always a really, really good idea. All right, so let's jump into the bulk of the discussion here today then. So we're talking about penetration testing and maturity models then for financial institutions. So I like to look at financial institutions as kind of a small, medium, and large. And I know that not everybody fits nicely into one of these 3 buckets, but for the most part, the smaller community banks and small financial institutions have very different needs and requirements than mid-sized and large financial institutions. So we'll talk about each one of those separately. So the small financial institutions, some of the challenges that we see are that a lot of times you don't have all the skill and expertise there in-house to manage all of your IT and especially your IT security functions. Because of this, outsourcing and using managed service providers is extremely common. But with that, you definitely lose some visibility and control over your systems and your networks and ultimately your security. So that's something to definitely keep in mind when you're developing your pen test strategy in a small institution. I like to focus on things that can validate that your controls are working, and including your managed service providers or your managed security service providers. So we want to validate that they're actually doing what they say they're doing, that they're capable of detecting attacks, that they alert you and notify you as they're responding to attacks, letting you know what they did to correct it or stop the attacker, or if they found out it was, a false positive, how they report back and things like that. So because of that, maybe some of the pen testing strategies aren't quite the same as they would be in a larger company or a larger financial institution. These can be smaller pen tests, smaller assessments, and they should definitely involve all of your managed service providers. So if you have an outsourced IT firm or someone that's doing all of your monitoring and security, let's make sure that they're not only part of the report out, but they're also part of the scoping and the entire process. I like to say, small banks, financial institutions that might not own a lot of their own networks should focus on the social engineering, ransomware, and bad passwords. Mid-sized institutions, this is really, in my opinion, kind of the sweet spot. It doesn't mean everything's perfect and the easiest to work with, but they have much less challenges, I think, than real small institutions and much larger. But with that, some of those challenges are certainly that they don't always have the budget, the team size, and because of small teams, project backlogs can be an issue. And that can also be an issue then for even remediating or fixing things coming out of a penetration test. There's nothing more disappointing than coming in a subsequent year and finding findings still open from prior years. So, team size and limited budgets definitely can hurt the mid-sized institutions, but those that are well funded or at least decently funded tend to operate very, very well. For them, I always recommend your standard annual penetration test that covers the external, internal, and the social engineering. If you have a lot of external assets or exposures on the internet, continuous penetration testing is a very good option as well. So instead of just doing things point in time once a year, extending that out and pen testing all year long. So that's one of the things SynerComm specializes in, is using a mix of automation and human pen testers to be able to provide a pen test that goes all year versus just for 2 or 3 weeks. And also definitely make sure you're thinking about things like wireless, physical, your cloud systems. We can deep dive and look at things like Active Directory and firewalls, or if you're custom developing your own applications, again, really important to look at those and that custom code and what exposures that might create. And then adversary simulations as well. So instead of just hiring a pen tester, hire a pen tester to work collaboratively with your team so that they can show you examples and generate attacks live while you're paying attention and monitoring so that you can tune your systems and improve your controls. And finally, last but not least, the large financial institutions. Some of the challenges there is certainly, there could be years of technical debt. There could be lots of, finger pointing even between different business units. Who owns the vulnerability? Who owns the system? Who owns the remediation? Who really cares sometimes? Ultimately, too, some of these systems might be third-party managed. So, I think that the biggest challenges in the larger institutions are the responsibility and who's going to take care of things. But they have big advantages as well. And I see that in multiple lines of defenses. It's not uncommon for SynerComm to get hired for pen testing from an IT security team in one large financial institution, from an audit group and another one, and even executive management or board of directors looking to do things like red teaming or risk management. All of these different groups in large institutions have different responsibilities and oversight over each other. So the penetration testing can often come from different groups and have different scopes. I would say in the large enterprise, continuous penetration testing is almost becoming a must these days. Likewise, those adversary simulations, doing 3, 4, 5 of those throughout the year to keep your defensive team up on their toes and all your SIM and other controls tuned well. And then again, all those applications, APIs, doing those quarterly password assessments and using the right firms, making sure that when you are penetration testing, especially in an organization this size, that you're looking at using the best of the best. No, I'm out of time, so I'm going to skip all my shameless plugs here. Obviously, you can tell we work in all of these areas of penetration testing that I just talked about. So feel free to reach out to us here afterwards. And I do have a couple trial offers there as well, or a trial and a free offer that you could take advantage of. So, Ron, I'll turn it back over to you.